Chapter 37, Progress and Peril. The following Monday, Ari received a response to the letter he had written to Carla. It was enthusiastic and gave promise of further contact. "How good it was to hear from you," her letter began, "and how sad I was to have confirmation of Nicole's death. I saw her name on the list of victims in the news, but wasn't sure that was the same person to whom you'd introduced me. I tried to phone you at the Sorbonne, and that's how I learned you'd gone to Israel. They could give me no forwarding address or phone number. So that's why your letter was such a welcome surprise. And how excited I was to learn that you have a newspaper column of your own, and in such a prestigious paper as the Jerusalem Post. Yes, it was a surprise to learn that you were really Jewish, a Holocaust survivor. I guess that makes you very special in Israel. I can understand why, when you discovered your roots, you wanted to live there. It seems strange to call you Professor Ari Thalberg now, after knowing you as Professor Hans Mueller all these years, but I'll get used to it." Carla went on to tell how she had broken up with her fiancé, Ken Inman, but that it was for the best. He was the one who had gotten her into the field of parapsychology, but he had recently abandoned it. By contrast, she was getting more heavily involved. In fact, there were some spectacular developments that she would soon be revealing to the world. Since breaking up with Ken, she felt a new freedom in her work. She gave no details about that work, but did hint again that she would be doing a special report, something momentous, soon, and that she might even give Ari a scoop for his paper. Ari brought Carla's letter to David at his office the same day it arrived. Her references to parapsychology, her work, the new developments, and the possibility of giving Ari a scoop were, of course, of special interest to the office. Only after its experts had meticulously analyzed the contents was Ari given the okay to respond. And of course they told him exactly what to say. "This is a great start," exulted David, when he returned the letter a few days later to Ari at Jakob's apartment, along with detailed instructions for replying to it. "We're very pleased. She's given you this opening to ask what the nature of this big news might be, and whether it involves some American breakthrough in psychic research, since she told you that was her new field." "No problem. She was quite open and enthusiastic about her interest in parapsychology when we met last in Paris," recalled Ari. "Then you have every reason to mention that subject specifically without appearing to be prying." "No question about it. Now here's what we're going to do. One of our writers will do an article about the possible involvement of ETIs in the area of psychic power. It will be published in the Post next week. Include a copy of that with your letter and ask her whether she thinks there's any truth in it. But play it cool. Don't sound too eager. When you have the rough draft of the letter ready, give it to me and I'll have our people fix it up." "I just wonder whether we're kidding ourselves," said Ari thoughtfully. "If these ETIs are really so far advanced psychically, wouldn't they be able to read our minds and know what we're planning and doing?" "I'm not sure they can," replied David somberly. "Anyway, that's a chance we have to take. We can't just sit back and do nothing." "I guess you're right, but it's frightening." "Now here," said David, handing Ari a piece of paper with the map and directions, "is where and when you report. Memorize everything before you go to bed, then tear it up and flush it down the toilet." A few days later, an excited and eager recruit reported to Mossad headquarters on Tel Aviv's King Saul Boulevard. Ari was to live with other recruits in a nearby apartment while he underwent intensive Mossad training that would completely cut him off from contact with the outside world for 3 weeks. He was assigned to receive special instruction in Mishlasim, gathering and communicating information, at the large 2-storied Midrashah, the Mossad Training Academy. It sat on a hill just outside Tel Aviv, overlooking the road to Haifa. The training was thorough and concentrated. When finished, Ari would be able to pass along, secretly and in the various prescribed manners, to the appropriate people in the organization whatever information he gathered. Though David had said no more about it, Ari was now confident that he was definitely going on that special assignment to the United States. Otherwise, the Mossad would hardly have invested this time and effort in his training. Ideological discussions formed the framework for the day's practical instructions and took up most of each evening. Ari learned that Israel, while grateful for the help it had received from the United States in the past, was fearful that it was being gradually abandoned by its old ally. The recruits were told that there were elements within the United States who considered Israel's very existence to be a threat to Middle East peace and the promised New World Order. Such parties, the Mossad was thoroughly convinced, were, together with the Arabs, plotting Israel's destruction behind the scenes. No mention was made of the influence of ETIs. Apparently that topic, which had concerned Ari ever since David had raised it, was still too clandestine even to be voiced outside of the Mossad's innermost circle. He had been told of it only because of his relationship to Carla and the Mossad's hope to use him in getting information out of her. David claimed she was directly and personally involved in developments at the CIA lab. Ari, however, found it hard to believe that Carla could be involved in any other capacity than as a journalist. Was it possible that she was working with the Nine, the same ETIs that Aylor claimed to represent? If so, what about the life insurance papers Ari had given her? It seemed impossible to unravel the web of intrigue that was being woven about him. According to his Mossad political instructor, there was growing sentiment in the U.S. that Israel's military had become so strong that it posed a real threat to world peace. Her nuclear capabilities caused the gravest concern. No one believed that Israel would surrender her nuclear arsenal, even if the Arabs promised to recognize her right to exist. Nor did anyone in the U.S. or anywhere else imagine that the Arabs would really stand behind such a pledge of recognition and peaceful coexistence if they made it. Yet Israel was criticized for not being willing to make such a suicidal deal. Small wonder, then, that his Mossad instructors projected a desperate sense of us against the world and expected fanatical dedication to Israel's security in those they carefully tutored. When Ari returned to Jerusalem, David carried on his highly specialized and enlightening political education once a week. It wasn't that so much of what David revealed was new, but that his insights were unique. He analyzed and explained the importance of events with which Ari, as a professor of political science, had been in varying degrees familiar, but whose hidden significance, even as a news analyst, he had failed to comprehend. Certainly he had not put the information together in the insightful and intriguing way that David now presented it. "The Cold War's out, cooperation's in," David began one evening when he came over for a visit about a week after Ari's return. "The question is why? The players in the game have their own reasons. The Soviets are working with the West for the formation of a new world order, or so it seems. Both are courting the Muslims, who have their own plans to take over the world. To abandon that goal, they'd have to renounce Islam and Muhammad. Not likely." Ari was nodding, listening carefully, completely absorbed in the rapid-fire analysis. "There's a fourth group, however," continued David with an air of mystery, "perhaps even more powerful and potentially dangerous than Islam. It wields a pervasive, behind-the-scenes agenda for world domination." He paused for a moment to let Ari ponder his words. "Any idea what it is?" "Another world player? Perhaps more powerful than Islam?" Ari mulled that over for a few moments, then shrugged his shoulders. "I've got my own ideas, but you probably wouldn't agree. You tell me what you have in mind." "I'll give you a hint. It's about the same size as Islam, nearly 1 billion. The two of them fought for centuries, but they're now dialoguing about what they have in common." "So we do think alike," responded Ari. "You must mean the Catholic Church, right?" "You've got it. The largest and most powerful Christian church in the world, and it has never recognized Israel as a nation, and, like Islam, rejects Israel's right to exist." "Odd, isn't it?" reflected Ari. "Christians use the same Hebrew scriptures and traditionally have been the strongest supporters of Israel." "That used to be the way, but it's changing now. Even hardcore Christian fundamentalists have been turning against Israel lately. But it was always that way with the Catholic Church." "Now you're talking about something that I spent a lot of time investigating when I was in France," enthused Ari. "I have no doubt that the Pope is the most powerful leader on earth today. Bush and Gorbachev consult him weekly. They work closely together for their New World Order, just as they did to rescue Solidarity and bring down communism in Eastern Europe. But they each have their own agenda, in spite of the apparent cooperation at this stage, cut in David. Exactly. And I think, when it comes to power, the Pope definitely has the edge. Well, we agree on that. Rome intends to establish its own world government, the kingdom of God, under the Pope. An idea from the Middle Ages, mused Ari, coming back to haunt us today. Incredible. And this worries Israel, I'm sure. Big worries. The Catholic Church has a long history of anti-Semitism. It claims to be the true Israel, with a divine mandate to rule the world. That's why it has never recognized Israel. I don't think the average Catholic knows this, suggested Ari. You're probably right, which is why the Pope has to work through secret Catholic organizations. Their tentacles reach into the highest circles of power worldwide. Even here in Israel, their wealth and influence is at work, openly and undercover. Ari nodded. I researched some of those organizations. There are dozens. It's the major ones that worry us. David's mood and expression had turned solemn. The big three concern us the most: the Jesuits, Opus Dei, and the Knights of Malta. The Knights, for example, are like another CIA or KGB. I was just beginning to really get into the Knights, said Ari, study their history and what they're doing now. I know they're a big factor not only in Europe, but in America, North and South, especially in the United States. But I hadn't looked at them in relation to Israel. Are they Is the Pope Catholic? It's that definite. David nodded emphatically. From their history, you'll recall some particularly intriguing incidents. Go ahead and refresh my memory. I don't know exactly what you have in mind. Let's take a couple of examples right out of office files. Toward the end of World War II, the Office of Strategic Services, forerunner to the CIA, made contact with Reinhard Gehlen, then Hitler's chief of intelligence, the Schutzstaffel, or SS, on the Eastern Front. Out of that meeting came a secret agreement transferring control of Gehlen's organization into the hands of the OSS. After the war, it then became the Post-War Intelligence Agency of West Germany, the BND. I remember, said Ari. Incredible, but go on. The OSS and the BND, continued David, worked together to pull off a brazen scam codenamed Project Paperclip. A wealthy industrialist in America, a knight, was also involved. Remember, this was a just-defeated Nazi Germany, full of war criminals with varying degrees of complicity in the murder of 6 million Jews and millions of non-Jews. Project Paperclip involved the smuggling of some 900 German scientists into the United States. Ari was nodding solemnly, his anger growing. Yeah, snatched many of them right out from under the noses of the Russians before they could take them off to the Soviet Union. Never mind the murdered Jews at this point, something else was more important, specifically the U.S. rocket program, which meant there were more than a few missing defendants and witnesses at the Nuremberg trials. Right, but the most intriguing part is the involvement of the Catholic Church in this rotten mess, continued David. Gehlen's brother, remember, Gehlen was SS head on the Eastern Front, who worked a deal with the American OSS, now the CIA, while his brother was secretary to a top official at the Knights of Malta headquarters in Rome. Another deal was struck to use the Knights to help thousands of Nazis, many of them war criminals such as the infamous Klaus Barbie, escaped to South America. A number of Roman Catholic monasteries and convents acted as safe houses in the underground railway known as the Rat Line that passed these Nazis along to safety. My blood pressure's going up, muttered Ari angrily. The Holocaust, and now this. I'm vaguely aware of what you're saying, but I never saw much about it in print. Guess I wasn't interested. David looked grim. What I'm telling you is all fully documented. I could give you lots of details from office files, including hundreds of names. Baron Luigi Peril, a knight, who took part in the negotiations that set up the deal. Prince Valerio Borghese, and others. But the names mean little now. By the way, Borghese was saved by the OSS from being arrested for war crimes by the Italian resistance. It's no coincidence that he was high up in the Knights. His exact title was Bailiff Grand Cross of Honor and Devotion. David stood up and began to pace the floor as he continued. Now listen to this. Borghese gave Nazi SS leader Galen and certain American leaders the Knights of Malta Grand Cross Award. Among the American recipients was President Harry Truman's envoy to the Vatican, Myron C. Taylor. He turned to face Ari, anger written all over his face. Enough of such details. They're not important. I just wanted you to get a picture of the power, the sickening duplicity, the Nazi cooperation, and the anti-Jewish bias of the Catholic Church, and especially of the Knights of Malta. No wonder Israel thinks the whole world is against it, muttered Ari furiously, more to himself than to David. You see now why we trust no one? If we're to survive, we have to be able to defend ourselves against the whole world. Ari nodded. But now you say that ETIs are mixed into this soup, working with the Americans. What defenses do we have against them? And whose side are they on? I don't know. It's a puzzle, and we haven't been able to fit the pieces together. The Americans and Soviets are now working together as never before in history, but they also double-cross each other. In spite of Gorbachev, the Soviet military and KGB have their own agenda. So does the Pope. Each rival is maneuvering behind the scenes to come out on top. The ETIs are working through the CIA at the moment, but they obviously have their own agenda too. And though we don't know exactly what their plan is, you can be sure it isn't favorable to Israel, for the reasons I've already given. David sat down again, looking like a man unburdened, drained. There was a long, thoughtful silence. At last, Ari raised the question he had been afraid to voice but couldn't hold back any longer. The ETIs, said Ari, trying to sound casual. Is there some name they go by? Yeah, the Nine, or Archons, came David's immediate response. That's fairly fresh information, and it has some mysterious significance that we're not sure of yet. The Nine? Oh, my God! Ari's worst fears had come true. He turned quickly away to hide his consternation. Hopefully David hadn't noticed his reaction. Look, don't mention this to anyone, added David, not even someone inside the office. We have a mole at the secret CIA lab. You have to know that, because you'll need to make contact when you get out there.